Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Enjoy Beekeeping. Today I want to give you 3 tips on building your standard Layens beehives. So if you've decided to take the plunge and go ahead and do the weekend warrior project of putting one of these bad boys together, I have found that after building several of these, there's 3 things that have really made a difference in the way they go together. If you've worked with dimensional lumber before, it's the thick 2x10 lumber that's called for in these Layens hives. It's a little bit tricky to work with, especially if you're not a woodworker by trade. I'm not a woodworker by trade. I just so happen to do woodworking because I enjoy beekeeping so much. I want to build beehives to put out in the apiary. So I've been building them just by the skills that I have and practice and watching YouTube videos. But I want to give you 3 things that I think is going to help you. They've helped me a lot. First off, with dimensional lumber, it's hard to work with because it sometimes cups, and that's just that little curved shape, and it may not be much. It could be 1/8 of an inch, but if you try to lay the board flat, you'll notice that it has that slight curve to it. That's called cupping. And I tell you, I tried so hard to pick out the best boards that I can when I get these at the big box store. Now I try to use repurposed lumber as much as I can, but if I've got an order where I need to build 5 or 6 or 7 of these like I do right now, I have to go to the big box store and get the lumber that I can find, and I really try hard not to find any cup boards, but you still are going to have some. So for that reason, one of the things that I've invested in is I've got these 90-degree vise grips that put the boards together at a perfect 90-degree angle, and it really helps out when the boards are cupping. And what you can do is you can put a little bead of glue on your boards that you're going to put together before you put your screws in, and then what you can do is you can start to tighten those down, and you'll get pretty darn close, okay? And if you're shooting for perfection, maybe this is not the kind of lumber you want to use. I have a plywood version of this hive, a really thick plywood. I'll be having a video on that in the future, but for now, if you want to work with the dimensional lumber, the 2x10s, I do recommend getting these little vise clamps. They hold your boards together at a 90-degree angle, and what's nice is you can set them in there and you can gradually tighten them up as the boards start getting as close as where you can get them. Now keep a hammer handy so that you can kind of tap them down or tap them over just a little bit, and then you can get it just where you want it, and before you put your screws in, you tighten those clamps up, and then you might even have to hold it with your hand and just drive the screw in. So if you don't want to make the investment, these clamps are about $20 each. So for me, it was worth it because I'm building these all the time. But for you, maybe find someone that has a set that you can borrow, and they work really, really good for getting these big dimensional lumber pieces put together. So that was tip number 1. Use the clamps. If you don't want to buy them, borrow them from somebody. It'll make the whole process of putting this together a lot easier. Tip number 2 is build your hive upside down. In other words, what you see here down below is the top of the hive. I have found that no matter how hard I try, because maybe it's because I'm not a true carpenter by trade, no matter how hard I try, it seems like when I'm done, I'm still off maybe just 1/8 of an inch. And I don't know, if you're like me, that drives me crazy, and I really try hard to get these things dead on. Now once in a while, I'll get that perfect beehive, but a lot of times I'm off by 1/8 of an inch. Now maybe it's the perfectionist in me. I really try hard to shoot for that perfect fit, everything nice and flush when you run your fingers across it. But I find that with these dimensional lumber pieces, that doesn't always happen. So I have found that when I put the top down and build from the top and then work my way to the bottom, even if I'm off by 1/8 of an inch when I'm here, when I finally put my bottom pieces on, I find that when I go out to level the hive, you can't tell anyway, and when you do that leveling process, that'll forgive you if you're off even just 1/8 of an inch. So instead of sweating about it like I was, trying to be a perfectionist and getting that 1/8 of an inch worked out of there, I just build them upside down, and I build them starting from the top, and I build the top down and work my way to the bottom. That way, if I'm off just a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. Tip number 3, I have found that it's a lot easier for me to make grooves on all of my pieces instead of doing tongue and groove, okay? So what I do is I make grooves and then I cut a tongue out of plywood. Now I use a 3/8 groove on all my boards. So every single board that comes together to become the Layens Hive has that groove. It's 3/8 of an inch wide by 1 inch deep. So then what I do is I get some 3/8 plywood, like you see here, and what I do is I just cut it into 2-inch widths, and I cut it the same length. Like for example, this is my short side, so I got a short side piece here, and I've got a long side piece that's going to go in here. And in cabinet building, I think they call that a cookie. So I have found that I struggle when I have to actually try to cut the perfect tongue and groove. You can be off by a 1/64 of an inch, and when you go to put your two boards together, you'll get that little bit of a wobble. And again, that was keeping me up all night long, and I needed to fix that. So the best remedy that I could come up with, and so far I really like this. I think this is a super deal. If you decide to try it, let me know how it works for you. So again, that is to cut a 3/8 wide groove on all your sides, your short sides, your long sides, and then you put that 3/8 piece of plywood in, just tap it in. It fits nice and snug. Make sure that you use a dado blade to cut that and get it dialed in. And you want it to be snug enough that you have to kind of put some pressure on to get it in, but not so tight that you need, machinery to pull it back out again. So you want it to be nice and snug, but not crazy, so that you have to beat your boards with a sledgehammer to get them all together. Put an X on one side of your boards, and when you rip your boards down the fence to cut the groove with your dado blade on your table saw, always have the X facing the same direction. And then when you put them together, when you actually build your Layens Hive, I always have all the X's facing in. That way, even if my cut is off by a 1/64 of an inch, okay, so it's really tricky to get it perfect, but let's say you're off just a 1/64, as long as you've ripped all your boards the same and then you put them together with the X's facing in, everything will line up perfect. So those are just my 3 tips that I wanted to pass along to you. A lot of you guys are starting off down the Layens beehive journey, and so I highly recommend this hive system, especially if you're just starting off. I wish that I started on the Layens system 13 years ago when I started my journey in beekeeping. But if you're experienced and you're a seasoned pro, I still think this is worth putting a couple of these out in your bee yard. You got to give it a shot. It just blew my mind how well the bees take to this hive system. They really like a hive that mimics what they find in a tree hollow. So that's it for today's video. I hope you're having an awesome spring season, and it's coming your way. If you're one of those folks that live way up north, don't you worry, spring has got to be just around the corner for you. So until next time, friends, enjoy beekeeping.